The land didn't care how old you were. That was the thing about the Peace Country. The fields stretched out the same way for a man of 20 as for a man of 57. The sky didn't adjust itself. The frost came when it came. The cattle needed feeding whether your knees ached or not. Thomas Aldridge knew that. He'd learned it the way most men in that part of Alberta learned things. Slowly, painfully, and without anyone offering to explain it twice. Wait, not Thomas. Thomas was someone else's name. Everett Calloway was 57 years old when the woman showed up at his gate. He had been 57 for 4 months, and he hadn't made much of the birthday. His neighbor, Walt Brecker, had driven over with a bottle of rye and 2 glasses, and they'd sat on the porch until the mosquitoes drove them in, and that had been the extent of it. Everett didn't have children. He didn't have a wife anymore, hadn't for 11 years, since Louise passed the February after the bad winter. He had the land, 160 acres of it. Some of it still productive, some of it tired the way old land gets when it's been asked too much for too long. He had the house his father built, the barn he'd rebuilt himself after the fire in 2009, and a dog named Biscuit who was going on 14 and slept most of the day on a feed sack near the stove. He had enough. That was what he told Walt. That was what he told himself on the mornings when the quiet sat particularly heavy. He had enough. The woman showed up on a Tuesday in early June when the canola was just starting to come in yellow along the south field, and the air still carried that cool edge that the prairies hold on to long past when you'd expect them to let go. Everett was out by the near fence, working a post that had heaved badly through the frost. He heard the truck before he saw it. A small red pickup, not new, with a cracked side mirror held on with electrical tape. It came slowly down the gravel road and stopped at his gate, and the woman who got out was perhaps 29 years old, maybe 30, wearing work boots and a canvas jacket with the collar turned up. She had a piece of paper in her hand. "Excuse me," she called across the fence. "Are you the Calloway place?" Everett straightened up, one hand on the post. "I am. I think I'm lost," she said. "I'm looking for the Hendricks operation. My GPS keeps sending me in circles." "Hendricks is 4 miles east," Everett said. "You'll pass a red grain bin on the right. Can't miss it if you're watching." She looked down at her paper, then back at him. "Thank you. I'm sorry to bother you." "No bother," he said. She got back in her truck. He went back to the post. That, he thought, was the end of that. He saw her again 3 days later, at the co-op in town. She was standing in the hardware aisle holding 2 different sizes of wire staples and looking at them with the focused expression of someone trying to solve a problem they hadn't anticipated. Everett was there for Chain and came around the corner and nearly walked into her. "Oh," she said, and stepped back. "I'm sorry, I'm always in the way." "You're not," he said. And then, because he recognized her, "You found the Hendricks place." She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. A small, quick thing like she hadn't planned on it. "The grain bin. Yes. Thank you." She held up the staples. "Do you know if these matter? The size?" He told her they did, and which ones to use for what, and she listened with the kind of attention that some people have. Real attention, not the polite version. She asked one good follow-up question. He answered it. She thanked him and put one package back on the shelf. "You're working at Hendricks?" he asked. He wasn't sure why he asked. "For the summer," she said. "I'm a vet tech. Dr. Ewan in Peace River has a contract with a few of the larger operations out here. I'm the mobile half." She shifted the staples to her other hand. "Nora Sinclair," she said, and held out her hand. "Everett Calloway," he said, and shook it. Her hand was calloused. He noticed that the way you notice things you're not expecting. "I know," she said. "You're the one with the fence post." He thought about her twice before he understood that he was thinking about her. The first time was that same evening when he was feeding Biscuit and found himself wondering whether she'd grown up on a farm or learned it later. Her hands said one thing. The way she'd held the staples said another. The second time was a week later, when Walt Brecker's heifer got into trouble calving, and Everett called Dr. Ewan's office, and it was Nora Sinclair, who pulled into his yard at 10:30 at night with a kit bag and her sleeves already rolled up. She worked for 2 hours. Everett held the light and handed her what she asked for, and mostly stayed out of her way, which was the best help he knew how to give. The calf came at midnight, small, wet, indignant in the way new calves are, already trying to stand before it had any business standing. Nora wiped her hands on a cloth and watched it figure out its legs with the expression of someone who had seen this many times and still found it worthwhile. "Good calf," Everett said. "Good cow," she said. She packed her bag. He offered coffee, and she said yes without making it a decision, the way people do when they're tired enough that coffee is just coffee and not a social obligation. They sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes. She wrapped her hands around the mug and talked about the work, the distances, the roads, the way the farms out here were spaced differently than she'd expected. She was from the Okanagan originally, she said. She'd done 2 seasons in northern Saskatchewan before this one. "You like moving around," he said. She considered it. "I like the work," she said. "The moving is the shape it comes in right now." He didn't ask what she meant by right now. It wasn't his question to ask. She left at midnight. He watched the tail lights of her truck go down the road and then went in and washed the cups. He slept well that night, which surprised him. He did not seek her out. That was the thing he wanted to be clear on in his own mind. He did not drive past the Hendricks place more than he had reason to. He did not manufacture calls to Dr. Ewan's office. He went about his days the way he always went about his days. The cattle, the fields, the fence, the slow maintenance of everything that needed maintaining on a place that had only one set of hands to keep it up. But the Peace Country in summer is not a large world, and their paths crossed. She waved from her truck on the highway. He waved back. He saw her at the farmer's market in town one Saturday, and they stood together for a few minutes by a honey stand, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the price of feed, a story going around about a black bear that had been getting into people's bee yards. She laughed once at something he said, a real laugh, unguarded, and he felt something move in him that he hadn't felt in a long time, something like warmth but located in the chest, inconveniently. He went home and told himself it was nothing. He was 57 years old. He was not a man who had things like that anymore. It was the first week of July when the power went out across the whole north end of the county. A transformer fire, the radio said, and it stayed out for 2 days. Everett managed fine. He'd been through enough outages to know how to manage. But on the second evening, when he was eating cold beans from the can on his porch and watching the sky go colors that no one had invented words for yet, he saw headlights coming down his road. It was Nora. Her fridge had quit and she'd driven out from the rented room she had in town. She didn't say why she'd come here specifically, and he didn't ask. He had a camp stove and dry stores and a lantern that was better than her flashlight. He made soup. They ate it on the porch in the half-dark, listening to the coyotes go at each other across the fields, and at some point the conversation had been going long enough that it stopped feeling like a conversation and started feeling like something else. Like 2 people who had been quiet in their separate lives and found, without quite arranging it, that the quiet was better shared. She left before it got late. He held the door of her truck open the way his father had taught him. "Thank you for the soup," she said. "Anytime," he said, and meant it, and then spent the drive back to the house reminding himself of all the reasons that any time couldn't mean what it had sounded like. Now, right here, I want to stop for just a moment. If you've made it this far into the story, I think you already know something about what it feels like to be Everett Calloway on that porch. Maybe you've been in a quiet of your own. Maybe you know what it's like to talk yourself out of something before you've even given it a chance. I'd love to know where you're listening from today. If you're somewhere in British Columbia, or up in the Yukon, or sitting in Ontario tonight, or anywhere else in this beautiful country, drop a comment and let me know. And if this story is speaking to you at all, a like goes a long way. It's how stories like this find the people who need them. Now, back to Everett. August came, and with it the long golden days that make the Alberta prairie look like something from another century. The fields turned. The work turned with them. Everett had a heifer with a bad hoof and called the office, and it was Nora again who came. She always seemed to be the one on call for his part of the county. He didn't know if that was luck or something else, and he didn't let himself think about it too carefully. After she'd seen to the heifer, she sat on the fence rail and watched him move the herd back to the far pasture. She had taken her jacket off and tied it around her waist and was squinting into the late afternoon sun with her arms crossed. And there was something so settled about her, so easy in herself, that he found he was watching her when he should have been watching the cattle. She caught him looking. She didn't make anything of it. She just looked back, steady, the way she looked at everything. "You've been doing this a long time," she said. "Born here," he said. "More or less. Do you ever think about leaving?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "This is just what I'm made of, like the calcium in a bone. You don't question it." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I might be like that about something," she said. "I just don't know yet what the thing is." He didn't say anything. He felt that the silence was the right answer, and he let it sit. That was the last day of summer, or it felt like it later. The last day of the uncomplicated part, anyway. It was Walt Brecker's wife, Gwen, who said it. Gwen was not a cruel woman. She was a practical woman, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. She came over one afternoon in August when Everett happened to have a pot of coffee on, and Nora's truck happened to be in the yard because she was checking on the heifer's hoof. And Gwen put 2 and 2 together with the speed of a woman who has done that kind of arithmetic for 40 years. After Nora left, Gwen sat at Everett's table with her hands around her mug and looked at him the way you look at someone you've known long enough to say the uncomfortable thing. "She's what, 28? Gwen said. 29, Sin, said without thinking, and then understood that he'd answered too fast. Gwen's expression didn't change. "Everett, there's nothing, there's something," she said. "I can see there's something. And I'm not saying it to be unkind. I'm saying it because you're my neighbor and Walt's oldest friend, and I don't want to watch you make something bigger in your head and then let it wreck you." She set down her mug. "She's going to move on. That's the shape of her life right now. You said it yourself." He hadn't said it, but he'd thought it, and Gwen had apparently picked it out of the air. "I know that," he said. "Do you?" He didn't answer. Gwen picked up her mug again. "You're a good man, Everett Calloway. You deserve good things. I just don't want you to." She searched for the word. "Spend yourself on something that isn't possible." He thanked her for the concern. He meant it. He walked her to her truck and watched her drive out, and then he went back inside and sat at the table and looked at the 2 coffee cups, his and Gwen's, and thought about what possible meant, and whether he was the one who got to define it. He wasn't sure he was. He was 57 years old. He was a man with tired land and good cattle and a 14-year-old dog and 11 years of quiet that had become so familiar it felt structural, like the beams in the house. He was not the kind of man a woman of 29 looked at and saw a future in. He was sure of that. He was almost entirely sure. He put distance between them. Not deliberately, or rather, not so deliberately that he could have explained it to anyone. He just stopped being available in the small ways he had been available. He didn't linger at the co-op. He let Walt field the call about the heifer's final check. He stopped sitting on the porch in the evenings, which was the only hour he might have a reason to wave if she happened to drive past. It was cowardice dressed as practicality, and he knew it. Biscuit knew it too, or seemed to, The old dog watched him with the particular patience of a creature who has no opinions but plenty of time. 3 weeks passed. He told himself it was better. He told himself he was being sensible. He told himself that Gwen was right, and that some things were just not possible, and that a man who had gotten this far without making a fool of himself ought to take care of the record. He was convincing to himself most of the time. She came on a Wednesday. He was in the machine shed wrestling with a hydraulic line that had been giving him grief all week when he heard boots on the gravel outside. He looked up, and it was Nora Sinclair standing in the door of the shed with the light behind her, and she was not carrying a kit bag, and she was not there on a call. She had a casserole dish in her hands, covered with foil. "I heard from Walt that you've been fighting with the baler," she said. "I made too much food, and I don't have anywhere to put it." He straightened up. His hands were dirty. He was aware of both these things. "Nora," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. Something in her tone stopped him. "I'm not going to pretend I don't notice that you've been." She paused and looked down at the casserole dish and then back up at him, giving things space that you weren't giving space before. He didn't say anything. "I'm not here to make it complicated," she said. "I just made chicken and wild rice, and it's too much for one person, and I thought—" She stopped. She lifted her chin slightly. "I thought you might want company." The hydraulic line dripped. Biscuit appeared from somewhere behind him and went directly to her, and she bent down and let him smell her hand, and the old dog put his gray muzzle against her palm. "I'm 57 years old," Everett said. She looked at him. "You know that," he said. I think it's worth saying out loud." "I know how old you are," she said. "I also know you've been avoiding me for 3 weeks, and the only reason I can figure out is that you've decided it means something that it doesn't have to mean. It means—" "What does it mean?" she said, not sharply, genuinely. "To you, not to whoever you're worried about. What does it mean to you?" He stood in the dim light of the machine shed with dirty hands and a broken hydraulic line and a casserole of chicken and wild rice and the old dog leaning against the leg of the woman in the doorway, and he did not have a good answer. "I don't want to be something you have to explain," he said at last. "When you leave, when you go on to the next place and the next thing, and someone asks about your summer and you have to account for—" "Everett," she said. He stopped. "I applied for Dr. Ewan's permanent position," she said. "It opened up in July. I put my name in 2 weeks ago. The machine shed was quiet." "You didn't tell me that," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't." She shifted the casserole dish. "I wasn't sure it mattered. And then you started being careful, and I thought maybe I'd been wrong about something." "What something?" She looked at him for a long moment. Biscuit was still leaning on her leg. "About whether you were paying attention," she said, "to the same things I was paying attention to." The light through the door was amber and long, the way it gets in Alberta in September when the season is starting to turn and the sun goes sideways. It fell across her shoulders and across the floor of the shed and across Everett Calloway's dirty hands, which he did not know what to do with. "I've been paying attention," he said very quietly. She nodded once. Like that was enough. Like she'd needed to know, and now she knew. "There's an oven in your house?" she said. "There is," he said. "Then come help me heat this up," she said, "and you can tell me what you did to the hydraulic line so I can feel better about my day." He put down the wrench. He followed her across the yard. She got the position. The letter came in October, when the fields were done, and the days were the short, sharp kind that make you grateful for a warm house. She called him from town to tell him, and he could hear in her voice the particular quality of someone who has been holding their breath for a while and has just been given permission to exhale. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you," she said. And then, "I told them I'd need to find somewhere to rent, something longer term." There was a pause. It was not an accident, that pause. He understood that. "Walt Brecker's got the old Fenwick house sitting empty," he said. "East of my place. Maybe a mile." Another pause. That seems reasonable, she said. It does, he said. She moved into the Fenwick house the first week of November, and Everett helped carry boxes. And Walt and Gwen helped too. And Gwen didn't say anything pointed, only that the kitchen was a good size and the windows let in nice light. On the evening after, Everett and Nora sat on his porch in the cold, cold enough for coats, cold enough to see their breath, with mugs of tea. The stars over the Peace Country in November are not subtle things. They filled the sky the way they always had, the way they would long after both of them were gone, and they sat under them without talking much, and what they didn't say was bigger and quieter and more permanent than anything they might have put into words. Biscuit slept between their chairs. After a long while, Nora said, "How old were you when you started this place?" 24, he said. "Took it on from my father, so you've been here 33 years, give or take." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "That's a long time to be somewhere." "It is," he said. "Do you think it's wasted? Any of it?" He looked at her. She looked back, serious with that particular directness she had. Not challenging, just genuinely asking, the way she'd held the wire staples in the co-op that first day, wanting to actually understand. "No," he said. And then, carefully, "Not anymore." She looked back at the stars. "Good," she said. And Biscuit sighed in his sleep, and the cold came in off the fields. And somewhere north of them, a great horned owl called once and then was quiet. There isn't a tidy ending to write here. Life in the Peace Country doesn't give you tidy endings. What it gives you is seasons and work. And if you're lucky, if you haven't talked yourself out of it, if you haven't let someone else's math become your own, it gives you a person to sit with while the world turns. Everett Calloway was 57 years old, and he had spent 11 years deciding he was done with certain things. He was wrong. That's not a failure. That's just a man being cautious with something that matters. Nora Sinclair was 29 years old, and she had spent 2 seasons moving because she was looking for the work, and she'd found it. And along the way, she'd found something else. In a machine shed on a Tuesday in September, in a man with dirty hands who was honest enough to say exactly what he was afraid of. That's not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all. Before I let you go, I want to say something directly to you. If you've been carrying a story like this one, your own version of it, whatever shape it takes, I hope you'll let yourself be a little less certain about what's possible. Certainty is comfortable, but it's not always right. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is set down the arithmetic and pick up the casserole dish and knock on the door of the shed, wherever you are tonight. Whether you're in the Peace Country yourself, or somewhere out on the coast, or down in the city with the window cracked, listening while the season changes outside. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving this story your time. May you find your people. May you stay brave enough to let them find you. And keep your roots going deep, friends. That's where the good things grow.